I was watching Joe Rogan interviewing geopolitical expert Dave Smith, and they had such high praise for Roger Waters, one of Pink Floyd's founding members.
Did you see the conversation that Roger Waters had with that CNN guy?
Yeah, and right, because Roger Waters was awesome on that. Because he knows what he's talking about, dude. And he's right about all of that shit.
So, Roger Waters knows what he's talking about, and he's right about all of it. Cool. Well, that's settled. Thanks for watching. Stop. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not right about anything.
The motivations of the people who made the decisions about how to deal with the pandemic, particularly in the United States of America, were based on the, on the thing that everything's based on, which is bottom line and profit and all of that, and not based upon the needs of the people. Which is why there's 1 million dead, and in China there's about half a dozen.
But we can never trust their numbers, right? I mean, we have no idea.
Oh, bollocks.
How many?
Don't give me the old Russian-Chinese propaganda nonsense.
You believe whatever the Chinese would tell you in terms of the death count?
I believe whatever people who are neutral will tell me about what's going on.
Right, Roger. So, only a small number of people died in China up till the time of your interview. No fully functioning adult believes you. Watch this from 3 years ago.
5 more bodies in 3 minutes and another dying in the hospital. Inside China's outbreak center in Wuhan, a local resident found 3 body bags piled inside a funeral home van, which was parked inside the city's number 5 hospital. And a warning, some viewers may find clips of the scene distressing. Feng Bin, the man who took the video, went inside the inpatient department. 3 minutes later, he went back to the van and found 5 more bodies.
这武昌殡仪馆这里面尸袋，刚才我照给你们看了，现在又多了。刚才3个，现在我数一下啊，尸袋，1、2、3、4、5、6、7、8，有8个。哎呦。
Bin later went inside the hospital and saw another man dying on a hospital bed. Bin's video went viral, but on the same day, police arrived to arrest him. Before being taken away, Bin quickly posted videos he took of the arrest online. He was later released around midnight after his videos began getting global attention. This month, Chinese funeral associations and several funeral companies are asking for help. A funeral home staff member told the Economic Observer that body bags and other supplies are in short supply, raising questions about the reported death toll. Reporting by Juliet Song, NTD News, New York.
So, this guy spent 10 minutes in one hospital. There are a lot of minutes in a day, and China has over 36,000 hospitals. It's not hard to make a guess at the minimum number of deaths in China. Let's look at a country with good medical record keeping and, to keep it fair, a very low death rate. A good pick is Japan. At the time of his interview, there were 37,008 deaths. China's population is over 11 times larger than Japan. That's over 400,000 dead in China based on Japan's numbers.
Which is why there's 1 million dead, and in China there's about half a dozen.
It's mind-boggling that he believes there was only a handful of deaths in China.
The Chinese are too busy encircling Taiwan as we speak. Okay?
They're not encircling Taiwan. Taiwan is part of China. And that's been absolutely accepted by the whole of the international community since 1948. And if you don't know that, you're not reading enough. Go and read about it.
Okay.
Wrong, buddy. Maybe you should read a book. 13 countries recognise Taiwan as an independent country. 59 countries have diplomatic relations with Taiwan directly. And a majority of countries agree Taiwan should be an independent country based on the last UN vote. So, saying it's been absolutely accepted by the whole of the international community is just ludicrous.
Did we solve anything here today?
No, well, yeah, we did. Well, I mean, no, we didn't.
I mean,
Because you're believing your propaganda, your side's propaganda.
You're defining it as
Taiwan,
propaganda.
you can't have a conversation about human rights, and you can't have a conversation about Taiwan without actually doing the reading.
Roger, if you're having a conversation about human rights, at the top of the list of offenders are the Chinese. Why is it always the Western world?
At the top of your list.
Why is it
the
always
Chinese
the Western
didn't invade Iraq and kill 1 million people in 2003. In fact, as far as I can recall, hang on a minute, who have the Chinese invaded and murdered, slaughtered?
Their own.
Bollocks.
Okay.
So, Waters claims China never invaded anybody. I guess he learned it from this speech.
中华民族传承和追求的是和平、和睦、和谐理念。我们过去没有，今后也不会侵略、欺负他人，不会称王称霸。
Looks like President Xi and Roger Waters say the CCP never invaded or bullied anybody. I guess he just forgot about East Turkestan, 1949, Tibet, 1950, India, 1962, the Soviet Union, 1969, Vietnam in 1974 and again in 1979, India again in 2020. Let's not forget China's involvement in the Korean War and the Vietnam War. And of course, in their own country, they've detained over 1 million Muslim minorities, including mainly Uyghurs, in an effort to re-educate and assimilate them. But apart from that, China has never invaded or bullied anybody.
Listen, after the illegal USA-inspired coup in 2014 that put out the democratically elected government of the Ukraine, the Russians were completely clear about how they felt about that.
You're giving them a pass. I have to say it. I mean, if I don't call you out on this, I'd be disappointed later.
There was no coup in Ukraine in 2014. No one tried to forcefully seize power. No one sought to take control of the country. In late 2013, protests started because of the people's frustration with the pro-Russian President Yanukovych. They didn't want to take over. They just wanted Yanukovych gone. He actually left the country when the parliament voted him out, but the existing parliament kept functioning and running the country, and they called for an election. But Roger Waters wants to repeat the Russian narrative that there was a coup. The funny thing is, there actually was a coup in Ukraine, but it was by the Russian-led separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk. Backed by Russia, they did use force and they did seize power in those regions. Waters says there was an American-inspired coup, but it was the Russians that inspired a coup in the East. Russia did exactly what Waters accused America of, but Waters won't talk about that.
Why won't the United States of America encourage Zelensky, or whatever his name is, the president, to negotiate and to explain why, when he stood on the platform of ratifying the Minsk agreements, which he did when he was elected by 73% of the Ukrainian population that was left able to vote, after that, somebody either whispered in his ear or he completely changed his mind about making peace in the Donbass and about solidifying the Minsk agreements and making peace with their Russian neighbors and obviating the need for this horrendous war that's killing.
You're blaming.
We don't know how many Ukrainians.
But you're blaming the party
Russians.
that got invaded. Come on, you've got it reversed.
So, Waters thinks Zelensky broke the Minsk agreement. The first points of the agreement were to cease fire and then withdraw. This had to happen before anything else, but simply put, Russia didn't do that. Russia just didn't adhere to the Minsk II agreements. The invaders ignored the ceasefire, and the Russian-led forces kept advancing and took the town of Debaltseve 6 days later.
It's still horrendously dangerous inside Debaltseve and its surrounding areas. Pockets of Ukrainian troops who haven't been able to escape but are trying to are still fighting. Separatist rebels who breached the city perimeter defences have taken over most of the centre. But their armoured vehicles still guard the streets, and there's a constant rumble of artillery. If there is to be a ceasefire, it's certainly not happening yet. We joined a specialist rebel unit tasked with tracking down Ukrainian soldiers attempting to escape. This war is continuing without break here. The separatist armoured vehicles are constantly on the move. It's become clear there's absolutely no expectation of peace here. The unit commander told me he expects the fighting and clear out of the city to go on for another 10 days. He said the Ukrainians are struggling to survive. If it stays freezing, it could be quicker, he said. The sense here is that nobody expects the ceasefire to ever come into effect. Just a new cycle in this war that's ravaging the east of the country.
Zelensky didn't break the Minsk agreement. The Russian-led aggressors just kept fighting regardless. But Russia is quite happy to ignore agreements when it suits them, as we will see.
This war is basically about the action and reaction of NATO pushing right up to the Russian border, which they promised they wouldn't do when Gorbachev negotiated the withdrawal of the USSR from the whole of Eastern Europe. He said, we will do this on one condition, that you don't come 1 inch closer to the Russian border than the eastern borders of Germany. And you lot, if I may include you in it as an American, agreed to that and said, sure.
Well, that's just plain bullshit. Gorbachev never said any such thing. There was no negotiations for the USSR's withdrawal from the whole of Eastern Europe. The USSR unexpectedly collapsed 2 years later, not a planned withdrawal. Waters is just referring to his buddy Putin's narrative that the West promised that NATO would not expand eastward. In 1990, when Gorbachev and James Baker were discussing the upcoming negotiations for the reunification of Germany, Baker said these words: "There would be no extension of NATO's jurisdiction for forces of NATO 1 inch to the east." And since then, Putin and his sycophants, like Roger Waters, have latched onto the words 1 inch.
And this was verbally promised and put in writing, was that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east.
That you don't come 1 inch closer to...
And I've reiterated many times, and you're well aware, not an inch eastwards. This is what we were promised. Not an inch eastwards.
That we would not move NATO 1 inch to the east.
That sentence was taken out of context from a much larger conversation. Baker is talking about the NATO forces currently in West Germany not moving eastward into East Germany. The whole conversation was about Germany, not Europe. And sure enough, the written agreement that came out of this was the Treaty of the Final Settlement with respect to Germany. Basically, the Russians would leave East Germany and, as per Article 5, Part 3, no foreign forces would be stationed in East Germany. To this day, over 30 years later, there are no foreign forces or NATO forces stationed in East Germany. The document says nothing about NATO expansion into Eastern Europe. But don't believe me, even Gorbachev agrees and called it a myth. So Roger Waters is again just parroting propaganda. But since we're on the subject of agreements, let's talk about the Budapest Memorandum. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine was free. But since the Soviets had so many nuclear weapons in Ukraine, it turned out Ukraine was now the third largest nuclear power in the world. To resolve this, Ukraine, Russia, America and the UK met in Budapest. The outcome was an agreement referred to as the Budapest Memorandum. In that, Ukraine would give all the nuclear weapons to Russia. In exchange, Russia agreed to respect the sovereignty of Ukraine and to never use weapons against Ukraine. So much for that agreement.
And if you don't know that, you're not reading enough. Go and read about it.
Okay.
And what about the agreement called the NATO-Russia Founding Act? This video is from before the war.
If you're interested in this issue, I would encourage everyone to read the NATO-Russia Founding Act very carefully. And I actually helped negotiate it. It says that NATO will refrain from additional permanent stationing of substantial combat forces. When we recently agreed to deploy 4 battalions to the east of our alliance, we also agreed that they would be rotational, not permanent. Moreover, the total levels are well below any reasonable definition of substantial combat forces. Russia, which pledged to exercise similar restraint, has increased the numbers of its troops along our borders, and it has breached agreements which allow for verification and military transparency. So NATO has respected its commitments faithfully. Russia has not. By signing the Founding Act, Russia pledged not to threaten or use force against NATO allies and any other state. It has broken this commitment with the illegal annexation of Crimea, the territory of a sovereign state. And Russia continues to support militants in eastern Ukraine.
Maybe Roger Waters should keep his mouth shut when talking about agreements involving Russia.
This is not taught in your schools, obviously.
When you say this, then I have to say, what about our role as liberators? You of all people,
you have no role as liberators.
World War II. World War II.
You got into World War II because
Come on.
Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor. You were completely isolationist until that sad, that devastating,
I would argue we were
day
always going to get in, and that pushed us in. But thank God the United States got in, right? You lost your father in World War II. Thank God the United States.
But thank God the Russians had already won the bloody war almost by then. Don't forget that 23 million Russians died, protecting you and me from the Nazi menace.
Did he just say, by the time the Americans entered the war, Russia had practically won it?
But thank God the United States got in, right? Thank God the United States.
Thank God the Russians had already won the bloody war almost by then.
This guy is just deluded. Russia had been fighting Germany from June 1941. 6 months later, America was at war with Germany. So, how had the Russians practically won the war when the war still had over 3 years to go? Waters is just an idiot. Let me tell you something about the Russians that Roger Waters won't. When Germany started the war and invaded Poland, the Russians helped them. Russia invaded alongside the Nazis, and then they split Poland up between them. In fact, it's such a dirty little secret, today it's a crime to talk about it in Russia. But that's not all. While the Russians were in their expansionist mood, like their Nazi friends, they invaded Finland. The Finns kicked their ass, and they lost that one. The Russians were an enemy to Europe. But then Germany attacked them, so all of a sudden, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Now, Russia were the good guys.
But thank God the Russians had already won the bloody war almost by then. 23 million Russians died, protecting you and me from the Nazi menace.
They were winning the war and protecting us from the Nazis? And without the help of those isolationist Americans? Really? The fact is, Russia would not have beaten the Nazis without American help. Although initially America didn't send troops, they sent everything else. And the volume of equipment and supplies that America sent to Russia is just staggering. America supplied 400,000 jeeps and trucks, 14,000 aircraft, 8,000 construction vehicles, 13,000 tanks, 35,000 motorcycles, 2.7 million tons of gasoline and oil, 4.5 million tons of food, 2,000 pairs of army boots, 107,000 tons of cotton, tons of factory equipment, including more than 38,000 lathes, 20,000 mobile multiple rocket launchers, 8,000 anti-aircraft cannons and machine guns, 135,000 submachine guns. America provided 55% of all the aluminium and 80% of all the copper Russia used in the war. They provided 53% of all the explosives the Russians used. And in providing all of this, America lost over 100 merchant ships and warships, along with their crew. So, Waters is lying about Russia almost single-handedly winning the war without American help. But don't believe me, listen to a man Roger Waters would be best buddies with. Stalin. In late 1943, Roosevelt, Churchill and Stalin met in Tehran for a war conference. Stalin was speaking about the equipment being provided to Russia. He straight out said, without the use of those machines through Lend-Lease, we would lose this war. It seems to me that Roger Waters is an apologist for China and Russia. Even his Pink Floyd band members think that. I don't know why he has an agenda, but he pushes it with little regards for the truth. He's a celebrity who speaks with confidence and sounds knowledgeable, so it's easy for his sycophant followers to lap it up. Looks like he ended up being just another brick in the wall of Russian propaganda, and he is comfortably numb to the truth. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, please hit the like button and let me know what you think of Roger Waters in the comments.